Hello there friends and welcome. This is a guide for a strength-based character focused on wielding the biggest weapons possible, even two of them at the same time, so the colossal, oversized greatswords, for huge swords and huge damage. The biggest weapons often have a bad rep on Elden Ring by virtue of being very slow and unwieldy. With this guide, I want to show you there are many ways of increasing their effectiveness even at the very beginning of the game, so you can attack fast and also retain your very high damage and fast mobility too, for tons of fun while playing your strength character. So without further ado, let's get started. First with your starter class and Keepsake, and right after by explaining how some mechanics behind our dual colossal greatsword character work. For our starter class, I recommend you go with Vagabond. It is certainly not just the most balanced of them all, but not a single point is wasted in the stats too. So perfect for our two-handed character who will require some dexterity and very high strength. For a Keepsake, the golden seed as usual to give us another flask charge during the early game, very helpful. The most important mechanic you should learn early on is two-handing your weapon, so by default whenever you equip a weapon, I have the Grafted Blade Greatsword here, you one-hand it. So my character is just holding it with one hand. The biggest swords also tend to have very high strength requirement. For example 40 here, and I have way less than that, which will result in attacks that have a very high penalty to damage. We don't want that. However, if you press Y or triangle, and then RB or R1, notice my character has now switched to two-handing his sword. The main benefit is that this will treat your strength as if 1.5 times higher for attribute requirement purposes, and also to increase your damage. This is especially useful for the early game, where you don't really have that high strength but can still easily make use of these powerful weapons. Also, just like with most other weapon types, you can actually dual wield even your colossal greatswords. To do that, the weapon has to be of the same type, so two colossal swords. It won't work with normal greatswords or straight swords. It has to be two colossal swords together. And then to attack, you press LB or L1 to use your two sword attacks. The same for jump attacks, you have to jump and then go with the left button to attack with both of them at the same time. Later in this guide, I'll cover how to best use your swords when fighting enemies, such as the best strategies, but for now, let us finally start with how to get the best colossal greatswords for our character even at the beginning of the game. Alright, so the first thing you should do with your Vagabond character is remove your halberd weapon. So now we have medium load, which means we get a much faster roll. Right after this, you'll want to rush ahead for our very first big sword. To get our greatsword, you have to go to the Caelid region, but just the very start of it, right here at Rotville Balcony. Getting to Caelid is pretty simple after you get your horse, so from the starter area, you just head north, then past the Gatefront ruins, keep going until you reach the Stormhill Shack, and after that, it's just a matter of heading east by following the main road. You'll soon reach Rotville Balcony pretty easy on your horse, and you won't be bothered by any of the enemies too. So can be done even at the start of the game. You can also be teleported into the Caelid region by heading to the Dragon-Burnt ruins right here close to the starter area and opening a chest, but I think just going there with your horse is safer. So after you reach Rotville Balcony, simply go alongside the road here. You might end up dying after getting the item, so I recommend you do it without any rooms. Keep going straight ahead, past all these skeleton enemies. Our greatsword will be at the chest close to the two dog enemies, right at that carriage. I recommend you go around the big dog enemies as to not aggro them too early. So our chest is at the back of the carriage, right here. Open it, and there we go. Now that we have our greatsword, it is actually a colossal sword despite the name. I really recommend you rush for Radagon Sword Seal, a very powerful talisman that will increase every single one of your physical scores, strength included, by 5 whole points. This does also increase the damage you take, but in the early game it doesn't matter that much, because enemies don't have that high damage. Most importantly, it will let you equip our greatsword, which requires 31 strength, super early. When two-handing it, you only need around 21 strength, and when aided by the talisman, that's just 2 to 3 levels you'll have to spend into increasing your starter strength as a Vagabond. To find this talisman super early, I already have a guide link to the side here, so please be sure to check that out. You'll have to go to the Fort Faroth area. After you get your talisman, the next step is enchanting our Greatsword with cold damage, not only for higher damage, but also the very powerful Frost effect, which just like Bleed, deals very high damage relative to the enemy's hit points, once applied enough times, and even reduces their defenses, so all of our subsequent hits will deal much more damage. You'll even gain the super OP Hoarfrost Tome skill to help you handle enemy hordes. And getting it is super simple, here's how it goes. It can be found right here in this little lake section to the east of the Caria Manor area, in the northern end of the Liurnia of the Lakes region. Remember, you can access this area, so the lake facing cliffs grace first, and skip the entire Stormveil castle by dropping down the broken bridge right here to the east of the castle. From the lake facing cliffs grace, you drop down the stone steps, then reach the lake area. You just have to keep going northwest along the lake. You can easily sprint past all of the enemies with your horse. Once you reach this little green area here, you can get back on top of land. Then it's just a matter of going pretty much north. Once you reach the manor gates, you'll soon notice these light beams coming at you, but they are pretty easy to avoid so long as you are on horseback, because they follow a straight path. Alright, so now that we are at the main Caria Manor gate, Grace, all you have to do is head east to this little pond here. Once you arrive, you have to defeat an invisible scarab, who is carrying the Ash of War we want. You can already see him going by the twinkling lights, that's the path the scarab is taking. They often follow circular patterns, and attack right as it comes. So here we are, the Ash of War or Frost Stomp. The next step is to upgrade our Greatsword through the blacksmith. There is a very easy way to do this even at the early levels. What you want to do is head right here to the Rhea Lucaria Crystal Tunnel, which can be accessed through this little marker I have set here, so in the lake region. You already have unlocked it, just head north from the Liurnia lake shore, and you'll soon reach this area. Inside, you can find some smithing stones, but most importantly, the Crystallian boss at the end will give you a bell that you can then offer to the Twin Maiden Husks merchant in Round Table Hold, so that you can buy infinite smithing stones number 1 and 2, to easily get your weapon to at the very least +6. If you're having a hard time with the enemies inside the crystal caves, who are resistant to slashing weapons, go with the flail, which is a strike weapon that you can also easily find in the Gatefront ruins behind one of the carriages in a chest. Now that we have a very powerful upgraded and enchanted weapon, the next step is enhancing our Wondrous Physic Flask with 2 extremely useful effects, +10 strength, and last but not least, a massive boost to our equipment load, so that even with the heaviest weapons and armor equipped at once, for 3 entire minutes, we retain the ability to fast roll for very high movement and easy dodging. The first step is getting our flask, of course, which can be found right here at the 3rd Church of Marika. Now we have to find the tiers to give it these 2 powerful effects. Getting the +10 strength tier is pretty simple. From the Stormhill Shack Grace, you will want to head northeast, past the 2 ruins here. You'll see a giant in the distance, which means you are on the right path. So just go past the giant and our tier will be in this bowl right here. Now our equip load boosting tier is a bit trickier to get, but also simple enough because we can just sprint here with our horse. It is close to the Royal Capital area, right here. It might surprise you, but you can actually reach the Altus Plateau and the Royal Capital even at the very beginning of the game, by crossing the Grand Lift of Dectus. This requires you to find the 2 halves of the Dectus Medallion, which is super simple. So the first one will be here at Fort Hate, to the east of the starter area of the game. As for the second half, it is at Fort Faroth, and guess what? We already went here anyways to find our Radagon Talisman, so it's a win-win situation. After you get both halves of the medallion, from the lake-facing cliffs Grace, you just have to keep going north all the way up here until you reach the Grand Lift of Dectus at the end. And after that, it's just a matter of going northeast, following the road here, then northeast to the Outer Wall Battleground, go up the little road here, and then northeast to the edge of this cliff, where you'll find our equip load tier protected by some skull enemies inside another bowl, But as I said, you can just skip ahead past all of the enemies by sprinting with your horse, very simple. Now I realized the bonus from our flask is only 3 minutes long, but frankly it is more than enough for the early game, not just for bosses, but also for dungeons, because graces tend to be pretty close together. For the ones that aren't, you have shortcuts. And as you progress through the game, you'll be able to achieve way higher endurance to boost your equip load anyways. Now all that is left for our big oversized weapons character is to get his second Colossal Greatsword, the Grafted Blade Greatsword, so we can at last dual wield or power stance our Colossal Greatswords for even more damage, and fun times of course. To get this blade you'll have to defeat the boss of Castle Morn, at the southern end of the Weeping Peninsula region, south of the starter area. The dungeon will be very easy with your character as is, after all of the power-ups that we already have achieved. Even the boss itself won't really stand against our character with his oversized greatsword, enchanted with cold. Just look at the damage we can deal. Now a fun part about this greatsword is that it has a very special, unique ability of increasing every single one of your stats by 5 whole points for 30 seconds, quite powerful. Now the true last piece of gear we have to get to really get our character going is the Claw Talisman, which enhances the power of your jump attacks by quite a lot, especially when you consider our damage is already off the charts because of our huge weapons. To find it, you'll have to defeat Margit the Fell Omen, which for this build isn't really hard, because we do so much damage. Defeating Margit also gets you your second talisman slot, which is perfect. So to find it, from the Rampant Tower Grace at Stormveil Castle, you want to head north, past the door, and now we'll have to jump over there to the roof. So what you want to do is sprint, and then jump. See, we were able to land here just fine. Now jump on top of the broken pillars, and jump here and here. And as you come over to this section, be careful because there will be a lot of enemies up here. But what you want to do is climb up the stairs, ladders I mean. Once you reach the top, you'll find our claw jump enhancing talisman right here. Alright, so let's now talk about attribute allocation for our mainly Colossal Greatsword dual wielding character. Strength is of course our main attribute because our swords do have very high strength requirements to properly wield. Remember that early on you do have the Red Dragon's Talisman for +5 to your physical scores, and you can later get Godric's Great Rune, as explained in this video I have linked to the side here, for another +5 to every single one of your stats. But anyways, ideally as soon as you start the game, you'll want to increase your strength to at the very least 21, because that will be enough to two-hand your greatsword, the first one you find. After that, in preparation for our Grafted Blade Greatsword, I recommend you increase dexterity by 1 to 14, and then strength to around 27, as that will then be enough to two-hand the Grafted Sword. For the rest of your points, I would also increase Vigor to around 20 early on, for the extra layer of hit points which do matter a lot when you're a new player. Dexterity is also something I would consider investing until you hit at least 20, because you do gain quite a lot of scaling from this. Endurance is also something to consider, but remember, we do have our flask for 3 minutes of basically as much equipment load as we want, which trust me, is more than enough for most of the battles and dungeons. So I would only really consider investing into endurance later in the game, after you get enough strength, and especially vigor. Strength I would eventually increase to at the very least 40, so you can then wield both your great swords without any equipment boosts. And vigor as usual is also something you should consider investing until around 30 or 40 even. Now as far as armor, honestly, your Vagabond Knight starter set is actually pretty powerful and one of the best early armors that you have available. With it we can get around 26% physical damage negation, which is pretty good. Early on I wouldn't really bother with other armor sets. I mean, you can go for the Lindell Soldier set that you get by defeating the Capital Soldiers, which we have unlocked anyways for our Equip Load tier, but you'll have to farm it from them. I would later upgrade this to other easy to get heavy armor sets like Radon's set, that you can simply buy, after defeating the boss of course. As far as talismans, Early on, Radagon Sword still as usual because the bonuses are simply too great. But as soon as you enter the upper mid game to the late game, you'll probably want to remove it, as the extra damage taken will start hurting a lot. As for the other talisman slot, Claw Talisman is a given, because of how high our damage is with jump attacks by default. Alright, so before finishing this guide, let's talk about how to actually play the build. You might have noticed that, by default, your Colossal Sword swings are very slow. There are ways to easily overcome this. The first is crouch attacks. So whenever you crouch with your character and then attack, you'll notice you do a very fast poke. Just look at that, there's almost no recovery or wind up. And because we have a Greatsword, this little poke will still do lots of damage and stagger. The second is rolling attacks. So whenever you roll and attack right after, you'll also perform another very quick poke, just like this. Last but not least, we have jump attacks. Whenever you jump and attack, you not only do massive amounts of damage, but also attack super fast. Honestly, this is the way to handle a lot of bosses jump attacking. By default, if you are dual wielding or power stancing, you want to use your dual wielding attack button, so the left button, to jump attack with both your weapons at once. If you are two-handing a weapon, you'll want to use your charged heavy attack with R2 or RB to attack the enemy. So the key is to combine these three attacks with your slow swings. Jump attacks, roll attacks, and of course crouch attacks. Something that I really like to do to start battles is first you hit with a crouch attack, and then as the enemy staggers with a jump attack. This will probably one to two shot most enemies, and it's perfect for fast enemies. Now when it comes to fighting some specific enemies, like let's say the dogs or the bird enemies who are very fast, for the birds I recommend you dodge and then attack with a poke. As for the dogs, you can also dodge and attack, or most importantly, lock on the dog and then slowly back away to bait their attacks, and after they attack once, you follow with a jump attack for huge damage, pretty much one-shotting them. Now if you find yourself being overwhelmed by enemy numbers, remember you can always rely on your Hoarfrost Stone skill to do huge amounts of area of effect damage and even stagger all of the enemies too. Just remember that if you want to use a skill, you have to equip the weapon you want in your right hand. So your Cold Greatsword goes into your right hand. If you want to use your Grafted Blade Greatsword instead, equip it on your right hand or two-hand it. Alright everyone, so this was it for my Strength dual-wielding Colossal Greatsword character. With this guide, you're sure to prevail even with big and slow weapons, starting from the beginning of the game, so that you can easily handle whatever the open world throws at you later on. If you found this guide useful, then please remember to like, subscribe and support the channel by becoming a member. Thank you for watching and see you next time, friends.